But talking about rugby, actually, so one of the piece of equipment they use, and you'll have seen on this program, is between their shoulder blades, they've got this little box. There's like a little accelerometer and it logs all their data.
Right.
So they can tell heart rate from it, they can tell impact from it, the G-forces, they can tell acceleration, deceleration. And last year I worked with that company to reprogram one for downhill.
Oh, mate. This was a question I was going to ask you, because you do crazy Gs and you know what an average human weighs. So therefore you know what they need to be able to bench press, right?
Well, you can boil it down to understanding that. It's like, what do we need to tolerate? And that's one of the questions I had, because I felt as though a rider was going off and I was like, we've done all this work that's been quite carefully thought about, and then you're just going to ride your bike with your mates. And I was trying to understand it. And years ago, like where this first came about was I was doing a sprint session with G in the build up to the season. And then after a couple of weeks, he was like, oh, I'm knackered from doing these sprints. And I was like, really? They're like, I don't get it. And he was like, yeah, I'm doing that much on the downhill bike. And I was like, I don't get this. So we put some power cranks on his downhill bike. We managed to get some power cranks made up for the downhill bike. And I said, look, all I want you to do is please press start and then press stop. And anyway, I remember him going off and riding and then coming back, and I didn't believe what I'd seen. So I did a day with him. I was like, look, I just need to be here for the day. Just let me do it. And basically he was doing a sprint session as part of his downhill. So every sprint, like his first 5 seconds were like 1800 watts every time he set off for a run. And I was like, well, why am I bothering doing that round on a flat road? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've got that covered.
So he's doubling up.
He's doubling out. I was just wearing him out.
Yeah.
But I would never have known that unless I got this insight. So that gave me a really interesting insight into what he was doing. Now, I'm not saying everyone's like that.
Pardon the pun.
Yeah, what? And that sort of got me on. So I've taken blood tests at the end of a race run. What's their lactate at? And you'll have seen a rowing event in the Olympics. You know, they cross the line and they literally just collapse. Yeah. They're at sort of 18 to 20 millimoles. Charlie at Fort William was 19 millimoles. So do you see what I mean? We're at that level of exertion, but Charlie's got to negotiate rocks and roots and massive jumps.
That's so
He
cool,
can't just shut his eyes and do it. So the exertion's there. And then I was trying to get my head around the load that was going through the rider. And also, what makes a better race run? Is a better racer or better race run someone who can tolerate more load, or someone who's smooth enough to reduce the overall load?
Watching Jackson, I would say the latter.
Yeah, reduce that overall impact.
Watching Danny, I would say the latter.
So this is fascinating. So I got all this data, and again, it's like I've got data from Fort William of Charlie, of Greg. We had that on there, and we had the first. It was brilliant because Stat Sports were fantastic to work with, and I sort of managed to. I bought the system, I bought the software, and then I got into conversations, and they just couldn't help me. Like the support staff just couldn't help me, and then I went onto LinkedIn and I searched out the sports scientist behind it, and then I got in touch with him and he was like, "Oh yeah, you this won't work for you. You need this. You need what the pro footballers they used completely different software."
Right.
Oh, okay, so then I did more testing, and he's like, "How fast are your guys going?" And so that I explained, 50k an hour quite commonly, and he's like, "Oh, right, yeah, we're going to need to reprogram this for you." So then they took the speed cap off it, and then we got more data, and then he was able to help me analyze it, but it was 2D, so we weren't able to match it with where they were on track very easily. And all of these things, like for me, it's such an exciting puzzle to be a part of. And
it's a very complicated one, isn't it?
Really
Downhill is very complicated.
Really complicated.
Because same track and different weather conditions.
There you go. Yeah, so all of this was different. So I was just trying to get an understanding, and then we went to Fort William National, and I got a lot of riders to wear this unit. I was running around like a blue-ass fly trying to get the data and log the data, and right, now I've got it. And then I know a guy who works for Red Bull's Formula One team who's a data engineer, and so he can help me analyze it. And he went into some wild. He was able to help me view it in a way that I could make sense of, and we could see some of the speed traces where Greg was really good in catching Charlie, but where Charlie was actually better because he didn't slow down as much.
Okay,
and then we could see the peak Gs, and we could see the different axes. So you've got X, Y, and Z. If you think about it, the three axes, and you've got trying to resist yourself being bucked over the bike. You've got the lateral being pushed off the side of it, which we don't get much of. And then you've got the load that's basically trying to squash you down onto the floor. And it was really like, right, where's the load coming from? And a lot of it was trying to resist yourself being thrown over the bars, which you would make sense. But also the landings, like you were peaking at 4 to 5 times body weight. And then what we were trying to do is understand the cumulative time, because these things are only fractional. So if you talk to a fighter pilot, they might be at 6G, but they're sustaining 6G, for, like holding on, trying not to black out. Mountain bikers may get to that, but it's fractional. So we're trying to understand, like, how long over a race run are you actually getting that load? And then how can I maybe adapt you for that load?
Right.
So this is stuff that, yeah, this goes through my head, and like, it's really funny. I used to read books on this stuff in the evening, and I now read Jack Reacher books because I never got to sleep. I now need to like,
on all the
yeah,
time.
I was like on, and I'd wake up in the night and I have a notebook by my bed, and I'd be like, my wife's like, what the hell are you doing? I've got this idea.
God, it's so interesting though, isn't it?
And I was like, oh, I've got to now wind down. So now all I want to read about is Jack Reacher turning up and causing havoc and then going away again.
It now comes to the point where it's like F1, where they do so much training on the sims. Like, imagine a sim good enough that you could ride downhill at race pace. Like,
well, have you seen Red Bull have got like a sim for skiing, and it's like this, it's incredible thing. It's like a platform that goes up and down, and they're trying to resist into it, and yeah, it's really, really interesting stuff. So it's not
all they've got to do
necessarily
is the ski one, hold handlebars.
yeah, I know. But
Same.
it's that loading. It's like an eccentric load is essentially what you're trying to understand, and then you're trying to work out, how do I program for it? Do I just try and replicate it, or do I do the stuff that underpins it? Because I don't want you looking like you're riding a mountain bike in my gym necessarily, because that's what you do way better on a bike.
On a bike,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you're always, you know, and often someone might not, so some of my riders might be like, I had no idea you did any of that stuff, because it's not stuff you bombard. Like, some athletes will be fascinated. Some athletes are like, I don't care. Do I put 120 on the bar? Do I put 140 on the bar? Just tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. So you're just, again, how do you get the most out of the, you know, the guy or girl you're working with?
Yeah.
Oh, I love it that you've done that though. That's
Yeah,
so
it's
cool hearing
fascinating.
about that.
Do you think there's a future in all that stuff for you and that
So
company?
I'm now working with another company, because we almost got to the end of like what I could do with this piece of equipment and my knowledge. And I've got another, like, Red Bull have been amazing with this. Like, I've got to give credit where it's due. There's a small group of people there who are really supportive of what I do, and they allow me to do this stuff and to go to some, like, I was at some events last year just to do this, you know, to get the information and try and work it out.
Yeah.
And I've now found another piece of software that we can, another piece of hardware that we can use that basically it's got a gyroscope within it. So it'll always find true north, because one of the problems with the stat sport is it doesn't find true north. So the more you lean over, the more it confuses X with Y and Z and all the rest of it. So all of this stuff is mental. Like, and I'm a novice at it. Like, I hope no one thinks watching this that I know what I'm talking about. This is purely like, I'm
Well,
not,
it's fascinating,
you know, I'm
isn't it?
just working on it and trying to understand.
What do you feel like you're working towards?
A better understanding of the demands of the sport. That's all. I just want to understand what you go through.
But it sounds like what you could imagine getting out of it is advice for an athlete on how they should ride. That's what I think is interesting about it.
Yeah, because as well, being self-employed, there has to be some sort of,
Yeah.
not business, but there has to be a,
Oh yeah, I hadn't thought that. What I'd just sort of thought that the data that you get. I mean,
I'm not saying you're doing it to hold it to ransom, but that is useful to you as a business.
I've never thought of it like that. Honestly,
Okay.
I've never ever thought. To me, that's CPD, like continued
Yeah.
professional development. That's all I think of it as. I used to have to write. I still have to do it for this certain accreditation I've got. I've got to put together like the professional development I've done over a 2 or 3 year block. And I remember having these massive arguments with these idiots who were assessing me, and they were like, "Well, that's not relevant." I'm like, "What do you mean?" I remember I was invited to Red Bull's Formula One factory, and I spent the day with them. I literally was the most inspired, motivated individual. And I remember having that as part of my CPD, and they said it's irrelevant for your job. And I was like, I have no interest in this accreditation. You can take my accreditation.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? What more do you want from someone to get this sort of information? And with this, I'm just trying to understand the demands. I think you can, having looked at overlaid traces of a former world champion and the current world champion, and having the resultant race run result on that one track, I can see why one rider beat the other, and I know why they beat the other.
Right.
So,
But it comes down to technique, doesn't it?
And also
That's
exactly
so
that.
interesting. If you can say you ride, whatever it is, you ride over the front, this guy's a flats rider, you'll be able to see it in data form. That's insane.
Yeah. But
I love that.
But you've got to be
So
careful. Like
interesting.
you've got to be careful how you feed it back, because the last thing, can you imagine? I go to Greg with this data, right? I've got this data from Charlie, and he's better on you at this section. You need to improve. And he's like, well, how?
But dude, maybe that is the next step. In Formula One, they're like, you're too early on the brakes in turn 3. They're just like that. And then the driver is like, yeah, I'll give it a go. I'll try and brake later. Like, maybe that is the next thing that makes it.
And I know that's something that the data, like the Norcos have all got a really good data system on them, and that's where they're developing that bike. And that's something we've wondered about.
Yeah.
Is it worth having like a brake sensor on there? But one of the big things that downhillers as a sport has struggled with, I think, is, we talk about coaching, never had coaching. The only coach I thought who could have really done something and never did was Neil Donoghue, because he was back at that point. Now, I'm not negating any other skills coach, don't get me wrong at all. But back then, maybe 2015, maybe 2016, something like that, Donny had moved away and he was doing stuff for one of these channel GMBN, but he was still doing stuff on the bike. He was doing a bit of coaching, and I really thought that he was the guy who'd be able to really be that man, because no one could question his performance on a bike. I feel as though if I'd have gone up to one of those boys back then and said, you need to do it like this, they'd have gone, you can't beat me, I can beat you.
But that's what's interesting about that rugby thing. Is that it's not about your opinion. It's just
there
about
you go.
So if you can put it out on a graph, and you can be like, look, what we're finding is in these sections, Peter's body position, where he's more over the front, it brings him out of the turn quicker, whatever it is, whatever that piece of information is. As a rider, I'd be like, interesting.
Yeah.
I'd still be pissed off, but I'd be like, might try
and also
ride
going
the
back
front.
to Alden, there's loads of footage of him telling Cooper
and he doesn't
Webb,
even I know exactly
your foot position's off in the whips, mate.
And he's never in a
Webb, you'd be
motorsport.
like,
Exactly.
fuck you.
and this sort of circles back to what you were saying about skills coaching, because if you talk about skills coaching and you're like, how would you put it into play? It's quite hard to do. It's a long track.
Yeah.
Well, if you got that data, hey, let's go up and session some stuff. I'll film you, change your body position. We're not trying to go faster.
Probably that thing is maybe the key to improving someone's race run.
And maybe it's a way of helping the rider trust that what you're saying has validity to it.
I'll be honest, I've always struggled a bit with skills coaches. When you see a skills coach that can't ride, or maybe not can't ride, rides to a low level, it's very difficult, I think. I would probably struggle to hear someone who I don't consider at a good level of riding. Would you?
Yeah, totally agree. 100%.
It's stupid because you can just look at it objectively and not be able to do it yourself.
Well, I think it's your bias as a human. It's sort of the inbuilt ego. Like, well, how are you going to tell me to be better because I'm better than you?
It's exactly that. But
Yeah.
then
It happens
also
in other
that is
sports.
valid, isn't it?
It's completely valid. And when you think about some of the best coaches, like going back to Alden Baker and him telling Cooper Webb to, do X, Y, and Z, he's never ridden a bike before. He doesn't profess to be a good motocross rider, but they've built trust and in that when he tells them something, there's foundation to it. And when you work with a high level athlete, that's the long and the short of it.
Yeah.
If I dream up something, and there'll be quite often I'll try stuff. I'll be like, can we try this? Let's try this. And sometimes I'll get buy-in with it. And sometimes I'm like, what the hell are we doing? I'll be like, okay, that's cool. No problem. Thank you for trying. And they're not just going to do it.
Yeah.
And there's some stuff that you'll try to see whether it's going to work. But with skills coaching, you have to be clear, like we were saying, if you're going to input something to an elite athlete, a high level racer who's way better than you on a bike, And we sometimes sit in track walks. You'll be walking the track, and I had a situation actually where it was with Bernard. So it was at Leo Gang.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, man, what an episode that was. You did amazing in it.
And so did you.
You shone like a star.
You shone like a moon.
Can we also put something up here that you can click on for the next episode?
How about we put a subscribe up there in the middle?
Yeah, love
We're going to put a video we think that our lovely companionship will love on your face.
On my face?
Yeah.
So
And
they
on
can't see me now?
Gone. And on my face, another video that we think people will love. And thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please hit like and subscribe. You guys are the best.
Peace and love.